Welcome to PICK Computer Science video number 47, where we look at string manipulation. So what is this? Well, the exam board might like to refer to it as string handling, or we might know it as string operations. And these techniques combine or manipulate, change strings by performing such tasks as concatenation, which is the joining together of strings, replication, the copying of a part or even all of a string. And we'll look at some of these techniques in a moment. So firstly, concatenation. Well, what does this look like in VB.NET code? Well, I've got a console application here. When I run it, it asks me to enter my first name, so I do. Asks me to enter my second name, so I do. And then if I hit enter, it tells me my full name. So nothing particularly sophisticated about that, but we don't need to be too sophisticated to look at concatenation, really. A couple of variables then to store the inputs, which are grabbed here and here, and then those variables that store those inputs are concatenated into a final output. And the final output is a literal, so something in red surrounded by red quotes is a literal. It's just some hard-coded text that will appear as part of your output. And then we use the ampersand, the and sign, to concatenate in the values of those two variables. And notice there's another literal here, which just happens to be a blank space, so it puts a space between the first name and the last name. And spaces are things that people often miss out in literals whilst they are concatenating. So they're an important part to put in. And where people get confused a bit with concatenation is often having the literals, the things you always want to display within quotes, then using the ampersand and having names of variables not in quotes. So that's one way to do concatenation. Another way is very similar, but instead of using the ampersand, we're actually using the plus sign, and that's what the exam board would prefer you to use in terms of pseudocode, and they'll use in their pseudocode. But you've got to be very careful when using the plus sign, because if you ever try and concatenate in a numeric value, so a variable that's been declared as an integer or any other numeric data type, then you might get an error, because it might try and use the plus as a arithmetic operator and try and add some text to a number, which it just can't do. This will work though, because this is a string, the value stored in this is a string, this is a string, and this is a string. Oh, and I haven't used a plus there, so I guess you can have a mix of pluses and ampersands. Let's just check this works, and it does, just as before, and I hadn't even realized that I'd used a mix there of the two symbols that can be used for concatenation. Concatenation can be done to possibly be a bit more readable, and could be done a bit more eloquently. On the last example, we saw all of our concatenation taking place on one line. Here we've got this additional variable called sFullNameText, which is going to add an extra bit of text in on each line. So the first bit of text it adds in is a literal, your full name is, and on the next line we make it equal to itself and now the first name, then and the space, then and the last name, and finally itself and a full stop. Now this is called appending, where we add things onto the end of an existing string, but it's quite a nice way to do it, and you'll see that happen quite often. If we look in the pseudocode guide regarding concatenation, the only place we see it really happen, well, it doesn't have its own section, let's just say, is within subroutines. And if we look at this procedure called greeting, we can see some concatenation taking place here. So that sort of denotes that they will probably use a plus sign to show any concatenation. And the calling of greeting and the passing in of Hamish on this example would probably output hello Hamish as all one word, because we can see I don't think there's a space as part of that literal. So possibly a bit of an oversight on behalf of the exam board there. You decide. Now earlier we talked about concatenation, and we also talked about something called replication, where part of a string or a whole string is copied. This next technique doesn't really fit into either of those two categories, concatenation or replication, but is part of the exam board pseudocode guide, so we should certainly have a look at it, and that is length. So here is the excerpt from the pseudocode guide, and it's telling us that to get the length of a string, i.e. the number of characters within the string, we would do string name dot length. So if the string was called s full name, we'd do s full name dot length. So here we should be able to see that happening. I've got a variable to store and retrieve a full name here, and I've also got a variable here which is an integer to then assign the result of this to. So this string operation is getting the length of the full name, and then is outputting it. It's going to output the line your full name is, and then we're using some concatenation again here to input to include the length of that string as part of a final message. So let's see what the program does. So it's going to include spaces. Dan Pick has 7 letters in, but 8 characters including spaces. And lots of you will have already noticed that I've had to cast that integer variable. Reason being, if I take off the cast and try and run the same program, it outputs my name, but it can't do the concatenation of the number 8 into the final output, because it's trying to treat this and this, these two literals, as numbers, which it can't do. So we're getting this error message. So the casting was needed. However, if I was to change these pluses to ampersands and not have the casting, we might see that the program actually works. Because I haven't used plus signs, it's not trying to treat my literals as integers, so there is another workaround without using the pluses. The final technique that the exam board seemed to want us to know about is something called a substring. And the pseudocode guide says to get a substring, we would need to provide the name of the string again, and this time do the dot substring command, but feeding in 2 parameters. And those parameters will be the starting position and the number of characters. So what substring is going to do is just extract part of a string for us and allow us to use it somewhere. So it could be deemed as replication, which we saw a definition of earlier on. There's an example in the pseudocode guide. It says that we need to note that the string will start with the 0 character. So let's have a look at this example. We've got a variable called sumText, which has been set to equal the text of computer science, and then it's going to print out the length value for sumText. So we can see it will display 16. Computer science has 16 characters including the space, and it's also going to print out the substring of sumText with the parameters 3, 3, meaning it starts at position 3 and will go on for 3 characters. Now position 3 looks like the M, but if we take heed of this note that the string will start with the 0 character, the 0 character is actually the C, meaning the first character is 1, the second character is 2, the third character is P, and it goes on for 3 letters, so we're going to include P, U and T, hence the output of put. So luckily for us, as with the dot length operation in VB.NET, the dot substring operation is exactly the same as it is in pseudocode. So this is the same as the example that we see in the pseudocode guide. SumText is set to the words computer science. It's going to return the length of that, which is 16. It's going to return the substring 33, which should be put, and it does. Some further reading surrounding this should certainly be to indulge yourself in some of the other string manipulation functionality that there is in VB.NET. So we've already looked at concatenation, the top row example there, but there are functions called left, right and mid, which we haven't looked at. So just have a look at these examples, pause the video in a moment and see what each built-in function, each string manipulation function would do to the text that appears. So what it would input and what it would return. Mid works very similar to substring. Instra, which is also known as instring or locate or position, is one that the exam board don't seem too worried about this time, but that returns the position of a string within a string, so is one that you should practice with. Len was the equivalent of length. We'll come on to char and ask at a later date when we look at character sets and ASCII. There are also functions to convert text, so you can have a small case word returned in uppercase or vice versa using ucase and lcase. And there's also the format function, which will put into a chosen format any data that you provide it. And there's an example there that handles dates, but you'd need to do a bit of further reading on that to know how to use it. Hope all that was helpful on string manipulation, and now you should try some out for yourself.